AM 590, KXSP Omaha's ESPN Radio. It's time for The Front Stretch, brought to you by Joe's Karting in Council Bluffs. Online at joeskarting.com.
Thank you for joining us this morning on The Front Stretch, presented by Joe's Karting in Council Bluffs. Booking, prices, hours, and so much more, they're located online at joeskarting.com. That's karting with a K.com. You can also give them a call at 712-256-5278. This is The Front Stretch, presented by Joe's Karting. I'm Dan Taylor. Thank you again, guys, for joining us. Bud, how you doing this weekend?
We're not doing too bad. We had a good run last night at I-80 Speedway. Scott Carlson was piling into the Joe's Karting Sport Monitor round. We found a few good things with the car, a couple things to work on, but overall, not a bad performance.
That sounds like your typical NASCAR post-race interview. Andrew, thanks again for joining us. How you doing?
Oh, not too bad. Mine is definitely not as good as Bud's. I had a pretty good past 2 weeks, I guess. I'm doing a lot of testing still this season, but it's going to be a good few weeks here. I got a couple more ready to start off the season here May 5th on a weekly show.
We do have quite the show lined up for you guys today. Intern 4, Andrew's going to talk about the NASCAR Wheeling Series that's getting kicked off. Actually started last night, right?
Not in Nebraska. It has not started yet, but the Wheeling Series, yes, has started this week.
Okay. And then Intern 3, we're going to talk with your father and one of the great legends in the dirt track series here in the Midwest, Joe Koziski, the owner and promoter of I-80 Speedways. We continue our tour around local dirt track races in the Midwest. Intern 2, as always, it's going to be the Fast 5 stories that are dominating the NASCAR world. But before we get to all of that, it's time to break down what happened at Martinsville for the Goodies Fast Relief 500. And before we even started recording the show, there's already been a bit of a brawl and a disagreement between all three of us as far as whose fault it was for the big accident that happened. But before we get to all of that, again, let's talk about how the race started out. Green flag goes, lap 1. Casey Kane's got the pole, but he never even leads a lap. He continues to have trouble in that 5 car, and yet another bad weekend for that 5 team at Hendrick Motorsports. Harvick does end up leading the first 21 laps. Looks like he's got a pretty dominant car, but as the laps lead on, Gordon shows just exactly how great of a driver he is at Martinsville. And again, Mr. Martinsville rears his head and Gordon takes the lead. He ends up leading 378 laps on the day, really only giving up the lead during the green flag stops. But then he could take it right back again. He had quite the dominant car. Johnson reared his head, as he always does at the end of the race. Him and Chad Knaus kept working on that car as the day went on, progressively got better. He was actually able to catch Johnson and pass him, and it kind of seemed like he was going to be pulling away, but as the laps wound down, a good battle was starting there. Kyle Busch, yet another frustrating day as he brings out the very first caution we have at Martinsville, as it seemed like he had a track bar failure, but I think later on in the race it kind of was real that there was something else that going wrong with that car, but he definitely had it whip loose, goes up into the wall, and his day was pretty much done.
You know what's really interesting is over the last 5 or 6 races, we actually hear a lot about this track bar issue. I've heard more about the track bar issue this year than I have in years past. What do you think, Andrew?
You know what? Starting off with the first race of the season with Juan Pablo Montoya and Jamie McMurray, there's definitely something different with the cars. I have not really researched that yet, but this really makes me think, what did they do to the rear of these cars to make them different? Maybe it's something with the body style that they had to do. Maybe that's something we haven't heard as fans.
It's interesting, and you guys that's a very, very good point that I'd heard of a track bar, but I've never heard of one breaking before. As watching some of these NASCAR races of the last couple of years, but all of a sudden it seems like every race somebody's had a track bar problem. Seems like it's going to be a pretty calm race as the race settles in and everyone just kind of takes care of business. The story of the day and the story of the week, whenever we go to Martinsville, is always coolant on the tires. Keeping your tires cool, because that bead will melt and will bust, and then you'll lose a tire. And that seemed to be Kurt Busch's issue all day, as he was only actually able to go about 50 to 60 laps on a set of tires before he had to come in and get them changed because the tire was heating up so much. Your normal green flag runs at Martinsville is going to be around 135 in that area before typical drivers come in. So he was actually able to go about a third of the distance, had 2 cut down tires, and at Martinsville, when you cut a tire down just once, it's going to be a rough day. And he went 4 laps down that first time. 50 laps later, he cuts another tire down, goes another few laps down, has a rough day. And I just wanted to make sure to point that out, because in case nobody's heard the bet, that Buddy and I have. Make sure you go back and listen to some of the previous shows. I can't wait to see you in a pink tutu.
Well, with those tires going down, I think that just basically ultimately comes down to the chassis setup.
I'm going to have to blame that one on the driver. I think he's spinning the tires too much. He keeps having way too many problems, and maybe they just don't have the fund money to do it all. Maybe it really is not nice equipment, but Hendricks is backing him up. You don't see the Hendricks cars having a problem. Kurt Busch is the only one having a problem. Maybe he's getting in too hard. Maybe he got into the side of somebody we didn't see. I can't tell you honestly what I think.
I think this just simply comes down to the fact that they didn't have enough coolant going to those tires. When you go to Martinsville, instead of just 2 coolant ducts on the brake setup and the tires, you've now got 4 because the whole brake unit is about 2 times larger than your typical brake pad because the brake pads have to be so much bigger. So that means the whole caliper has to be larger, the whole setup has to be larger, and you've still got the same amount of room in that actual tire. Steel rim meets rubber, and it heats up pretty quickly. And I think they said that without the proper cooling, those tires, the actual rims can heat up to about 14 to 1600 degrees. At that temperature, I don't care how good your glue is, your rubber is going to melt right off that steel. So the race continues. There does seem to be some pretty strong cars, as we mentioned earlier. Gordon, Johnson, Earnhardt. Gee, look at that. The Hendricks right up front. And then Clint Boyer had a pretty dominant car all day. Other cars were kind of coming and going as the day went on, but you saw those 4 cars consistently up in the front. With 4 laps to go is when this all started to unveil, and this is where we're going to get into the majority of the debate today. The first debate I want to talk about is David Rudiman, and as soon as we're able to get Joe Koziski in here, I want to get his perspective as a car owner as far as what happened with Rudiman. But what you saw on TV was simply that Rudiman did not come to the pits while he was continuing to have issues with his car. He was trying to stay out and trying to stay on that ever-important top 35 in owner points. Eventually, the engine gives way. The steering gives way. He had so many things that went wrong with that car at the end of the race, he wasn't able to get into the pits. While he is limping that car around, we're seeing a seriously awesome battle for the lead start to develop between Johnson and Gordon, and this was coming down to that kind of a race end that we want at Martinsville, we want at Bristol, we want at those short tracks. It's 1 and 2 bumping and rubbing off of each other as they're trying to get the lead. You could tell Gordon was just, he wanted that race so bad. He wanted to get that win, you could tell, because despite the fact that it was old 5-time and it was his teammate and they are friends and that's his car on the outside to him, he owns the 48 car. He was bumping and rubbing the 48. He wanted that lead back.
That was actually a lot of fun to watch him and Johnson really go at it back and forth right there. As far as Rudiman, being the end of the race, he's not worried about winning the race or being top 10 or whatever. He just wants to solidify his team being in the top 35 in owner points.
Well, he obviously wasn't going to win the race. He was 61 laps down at that point. But what he would have done, had he been able to finish the race running, he would have beat David Blaney and he would have finished 31st. We talk about how every point matters. Well, if you look at the top 35 in owner points right now, as it is, David Rudiman in that 10 car is 1 point out. If he would have finished that race, he would have got that point, and since he would have finished the race, he would have got that 35th position, so he'd have been locked in for Sunday at Texas Motor Speedway next Sunday, not obviously today since the NASCAR guys are off. That was so important, but it inevitably came down to it cost NASCAR an awesome finish. It ended up producing a pretty good finish and a pretty heated finish when we all get done with the show today, but it ended up costing NASCAR that great Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson battle for the last 3 laps. So the caution comes out with 4 laps to go because of Rudiman in the 10, and Johnson and Gordon are both stuck with a horrible decision. Do you come or do you stay out? They've got 130 laps, about 130 laps on their tires. They stay out. Almost the entire field comes in and gets fresh tires, whether it be 2 fresh tires or 4 fresh tires, which sets up just an absolute cluster at the end. I mean, you're talking about drivers that can absolutely get up and go. When you've got fresh tires at Martinsville, you're going about a second and a half faster than guys who don't have fresh tires and have got pretty used tires. So when it came down to it, green flag waves. It's Gordon, Johnson 1-2, then Boyer in 3rd, I believe Keselowski 4th, Newman 5th, and I can't remember who was sitting in the 6th position, but if you go back and watch the replay, this is the heated debate between all of us. I think Bowyer caused that accident. I think I've made my case off the air and talk about this. If I'm Bowyer, I know I want to go for that win. I'm going to stick my nose in there, but I'm also thinking to myself, I've got a green-white checkered to do this. I've got 3 laps to win this race. I don't need to do it in turn 1, and he stuck his nose in there, and I think he caused the accident.
I think he was a part of the cause, but ultimately, the way I looked at it, he did what any driver. If I'm out at I-80 Speedway this upcoming weekend and we got 3 laps to go or 2 laps left to go, Andrew and I were just laughing about this before we went on air today. You know, was it back in 2006 or something, Andrew? You said you watched me go from the dead back past every car, is at the end of the race. Clint Bowyer, and Dan and I, before the air, you and I were battling about this. I think Clint Bowyer is an exceptional driver. I told Dan, before it's all said and done, he'll have 2 or 3 championships. He's every bit as good as Gordon and Johnson. But Bowyer did what any good competitive driver is going to do. Had he pulled that move halfway through the race, that was the wrong time to do it. But when you got 3 laps left to go and you pull that move, that's an aggressive move. His car goes to the inside. Left side tires hit the inside yellow line. Car bounces up, but at the exact same time, the way I saw the replay, Johnson's car comes down, taps Gordon.
Well, I think you just said it right there. Is you said that earlier in the race it would have been a good time to do it, but that was the wrong time to do it.
In the middle of the race, if I said it was a good time, I'm wrong. In the middle of the race, that's the worst time to do it.
Is in the middle of the race. You're going to pull an aggressive move like that. He had fresh tires. He had the fuel. He had a better car than Johnson and Gordon. So he's going to make that aggressive move to get in there to take the lead. Had he not hit the inside yellow line, I think the car would have stuck with the fresh tires and we'd been just fine. There's no possible way, if he'd have had 9 fresh tires on that car, he would have made it stick. You cannot go 3 wide at Martinsville. It does not happen. We're not at Bristol where you can attempt 3 wide. You cannot go 3 wide at Bristol.
He was on the inside.
Bowyer knows that.
Yeah, he was on the inside. 12 tires will make you turn just as good as 4.
That was the funniest comment that I heard all day at the post race when Johnson said, well, apparently Clint Bowyer decided to try to use 12 tires to make that move rather than just his regular 4. Andrew, help us settle this. Did Bowyer cause that accident?
Well, let's bring it back now with the decision of the pits. Gordon and Johnson, of course, weren't going to take a pit because they could sit there and block. It's a 2-wide racetrack. It's not a 3-wide track. So they're going to sit there and they're going to block the whole rest race. Clint probably should have waited to the white flag lap, maybe turns 3 and 4 to try to make that move. I honestly think he might have been able to drive right past him, but I want to backpedal. When Newman gave him an extra bump, that sprung Clint so far forward and so fast, he probably had no idea exactly what to do, and he just kind of shot the gap he thought he had, but he stuck his nose in there, and of course he caused the wreck, but it's not 100% his fault. But then again, if he wouldn't have stuck his nose in there, he'd have got 3rd, and he might have even won if they'd have just waited 1 more lap.
And, buddy, I like your opinion on this. I like what you said to me. You said, you didn't like Bristol because it was too wide of racing. He said, this is the finish you were wanting. And as mad as I am at Bowyer for causing that accident, because I wanted Gordon to win that race, and I wanted to see a great finish between Johnson and Gordon. I'm happy that Newman won it. He deserved to win a race. The guy has tried so hard at Stewart Haas Racing to win, and this is the kind of a race we were looking to have.
Isn't this actually Newman's 2nd win of the year? Actually,
no, he hasn't won this year.
I thought he had 2 wins this year, but I believe this is the 16th win for Stewart Haas Racing.
Yeah, no, this is Newman's first win. I want to say it was. Gosh, I can't remember how many races it's been. It was last year he won.
He won in
earlier.
the chase, I think, didn't he?
No, because it was only Stewart that seemed to win in the chase.
Yeah.
No, gosh, was it Chicagoland that because it was Tony and Ryan that finished 1-2 earlier in the season, and then later when they came back and raced it again, it was Stewart and Newman that finished 1-2. This time, Stewart finished first, Newman finished second. So.
But NASCAR needed a finish like this at the short track. When you watch Bristol, and like you said a couple of weeks ago, when you watch Bristol and the cars look like they rolled off the showroom floor, it makes for a boring race.
It does.
This is the kind of stuff that we need in NASCAR.
And here's the thing. When you saw everybody pit and everybody come back out with nice fresh tires, a full tank of gas so that they weren't going to run out, there wasn't going to be any kind of a fuel mile strategy, I sat up in my recliner and I said, oh, this is going to get nasty because you pretty much knew. And I think Chad Canal said on the radio best, even though we can't repeat his exact words, he knew they were done. And if Johnson and Gordon would have come to the pits, somebody would have stayed out. So there's no way that all the field would have came. They were just in a bad situation. Whatever they'd have done, the field would have done the opposite to stay out and bury those guys.
I have a quick question here. Now, back at Sonoma, when Darian Grubb told Hamlin to come on in.
Fontana.
At Fontana, Grubb tells Hamlin to come on in. Everybody's staying out, whatever. We talked about, Darian Grubb making this mistake on pit strategy. Was this a bad mistake on pit strategy for the 24 and the 48 teams?
No, I don't think it was. Like I said, it's a too wide track. Them two were trying to use the track as best they could, and Clint Boyer just took a half a groove and took them two right out of the race, I guess.
So anyways, the race finishes up. Newman ends up taking the checkered flag, wins on a green-white checkered. He comes up 2 places in the points. He's now 8th, so Stewart-Haas Racing now has both of their drivers in the top 10. AJ Allmendinger, we talked about it earlier, had a good race, had a nice, solid, clean race. And you know what? It's better to have luck on your side sometimes than skill. And
Absolutely.
he was able to get through that carnage at the end of the race and finishes second. Dale Earnhardt Jr., 2 weeks in a row, finishes third, has a great race. I mean, I don't think he had a winnable car, but you know what? He had a top 5 car. He keeps it in third place, and this team's on fire. We're going to talk about it later in the show. Kenseth comes in 4th. Truex Jr. rounds out the top 5. Denny Hamlin, Tony Stewart, Eric Almirola. There's a name we don't typically see in the top 10. Eric Almirola. Brad Keselowski with another short track win, and Clint Boyer falls from finishing 3rd if he'd have been patient to finishing 10th, but that may just be a little bit bias on my point.
And the guy that should have won the race, in my opinion.
I don't think so. But anyways, that's what makes this such a great debate. As we always do, we have a trivia question ready for you to go. Get onto our Facebook page, become a fan of us, and then when you know the answer to the question, post it on the wall, and the first person to answer it is going to get themselves a 3-pack of racing to Joe's Karting, and that's going to be 3 adult races at Joe's Karting at your leisure. So get to our Facebook page, The Front Stretch, presented by Joe's Karting. Just search for it in the bar, become a fan of us, and then answer this question. When the flag man throws the blue flag with 1 yellow stripe through it at the number 51 car, what does it mean?
Andrew Kaziski, get out of my way. I'm coming through.
And I threw the 51 car in there just to pick a little fun at Bud. But when the flag man throws a blue flag with 1 yellow stripe through it at a car, what does it mean? Post that on our Facebook page, and you're going to win yourself a 3-pack to Joe's Karting. Make sure to head over there and do that right now before somebody else does. You have until the end of turn 2 to get that, and then we are going to answer the question. Last week's question, we haven't answered it yet because we asked it 2 weeks in a row. Name a driver who has led laps in all 5 Sprint Cup races, and who was it?
Jeff Gordon, who actually is the only driver to lead in all 6 races now because he was dominant at Martinsville. So next week we'll answer that question. We'll answer the question we asked today, and you'll be able to figure it out. So head over to the Joe's Karting Facebook page, the Front Stretch Facebook page presented by Joe's Karting. Make sure to stay tuned to Turn 2 as we're going to be breaking down the Fast 5, the 5 stories that are happening in the NASCAR world on the Front Stretch presented by Joe's Karting on AM 590, Omaha's ESPN Radio.